things exist in life, but then if you start going underneath, there are other levels. I think in writing, what I do is try to find something lyrical, something poetic that elevates what I'm doing.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Writing Inspirations with Markee Books. I'm your host, Dan Recoveri, and here we have our guest for today. Say hello to Charles Gomez. Hello, Charles. How are you?
How are you doing? A good morning here in New York. How is it where you are?
Oh, it's sunny and full of life right now. So, tell me, Charles, how did it start? I mean, your writing career.
Wow. Well, I would say when I was 11 years old, my English teacher asked the class to write a short story, and I ended up writing a 100-page manuscript called The Hidden Treasure. And my principal called me into the office and he goes, "You know, Chuck, you might have a career in writing." So I sort of laughed then. Of course, now, so many years later, I've written two books. The second one is in the process of being proofread by the publisher. And I guess my principal was right.
When did you write your first book?
Well, I wrote my first book in 2020 called Cuban Sun Rising. And it was an autobiography. And it was about my experiences as a network correspondent, but also the thread that ran through it was the relationship with my father. And in Cuban communities, if you are gay, it's very taboo. And so for my entire life, I kept it secret from my father, especially, who was a very macho Cuban. And it wasn't until my 60s, he was 88 at the time, and finally we reconciled after I took him to Cuba, and he had not been there in 6 decades. So after we went there and we just really bonded, I went with my brother as well. And we were finally able to reconcile, and he told me all the time that there were no problem and that he, always loved me, and it was a great experience. So that book, like I said, was called Cuban Sun Rising. And so I decided after the success of that book that I wanted to write another book. And I thought this time I'm going to do a novel. And I've written the novel. It's called Eye of the Storm.
Okay. As you mentioned, there's a very big gap between the two times from your childhood to that date. What made you change your mind about giving it a try to write again?
Well, so many things, of course, happened during that time. But when I was 25 years old, I was hired by CBS News to be their Latin American correspondent. So I was covering a lot of the wars and revolutions in Central America, El Salvador, Nicaragua. And of course, as a journalist, you have to write. We always do our reports. But the writing that you do as a journalist is not exactly the writing that you do when you're writing a book or you're writing a novel. It's a very different kind of writing. As a journalist, we're very interested in knowing the facts: who, what, when, where, why, how. But in writing my novel, for example, you have to be a little bit more lyrical. And that's what I would say is the biggest difference. But I guess I've always been writing my entire life, because even before I was hired at CBS, I was a reporter, a young reporter. I was hired at 21 by a station in Miami. And of course, I had to write then. But I would say I've been writing a long time.
Yeah, I can see that. Being a journalist is basically being a writer too.
Yes, it is. Yes,
Are
it
you
is.
still a journalist?
No, I retired in 1998. So I'm retired now. And being retired has given me more time to write, because when you're a reporter, you're working sometimes 12, 15 hours a day. So it's given me the time to write. I had an episode in 2012 where I had a quadruple bypass heart surgery. And after that surgery, I just said, okay, so what am I going to do now? I've been given, God has given me the opportunity to keep on living. So I started writing the autobiography. And it was interesting because I had a therapist at that time, and we would work together in a Zoom meeting like we're having right now. And he would say to me, Chuck, write one chapter. When you're finished with the chapter, send it to me. And when we meet again to have our psychology session, I will tell you what I thought of the chapter. Now, he had written several books, so he was a very good mentor, and he would say things like, Chuck, why didn't you mention this? And you're not going far enough, and you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And so it's interesting. My therapist became my editor. And so finally I finished the book after, oh my God, it took me maybe 3 years to finish, but I did finish it. And when I had first looked at it, it was almost like 500 pages. And I had sent it to my publisher, Kohler Books, and he says, Chuck, you realize you've written, what is this, Tale of Two Cities or a Charles Dickens novel? It's too long, you got to cut it. So I had to cut it in half, and I did that. And I always thought, okay, so after I do an autobiography, which is very different because you're telling your life story, I want to write something that's a little bit more, I don't want to say creative, because writing an autobiography was creative as well. But I think writing a novel takes...
Honestly, an autobiography I think it's a lot more difficult in a way.
To write a novel or an autobiography?
An autobiography.
Oh,
it's a lot more difficult. Same with not fiction.
Well, let me see. I thought writing fiction was a little bit more difficult than my autobiography, only because you really have to use your imagination and create new worlds and invent scenarios. And that is a different kind of writing. I didn't know if I could do it, to tell you the truth. And my therapist, who again, each month I would send him a chapter, and he would tell me, oh, Chuck, you have to work on this. And it's been 4 years that I've been writing, 4.5 years that I've been writing this latest book. So I like to take my time when I write. I always admire these writers who can just crank out, novel after novel in 60 days. I'm not one of those writers. I need to take my time and look at it.
The fastest I ever met someone to write a novel from my guest here, it's 1 month.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm not saying that a good novel can't be written in a month, but I find, at least for me, that I want to go over it. I look at it. I go to sleep. I have a dream about, it takes me just a much longer time than those writers. So, I admire them, but it's not me.
I get it. So, as you became a traditionally published writer, did you have the contacts from the start?
Did I have the contacts? Did you
Yeah,
say?
because most people start as self-publishing and then they go to traditional.
Well, no, actually, I got in touch with we would call a hybrid publisher. So, but what that means is you don't do it all yourself. They do things, they design the cover, they edit it, they proofread it, they put it out there, they put it on Amazon. And so I wasn't completely self-published. It was semi-self-published. And no, the contacts. When I started, I sent out letters to 25 different agents, and because I was hoping to get a contract with a big publishing house, and they all said the same things to me. Same thing. They said, Chuck, no one knows who you are, so how can you guarantee a publisher a return on their investment? And of course, I couldn't argue with that. A lot of times when you see autobiographies, they're famous people, Cicely Tyson, Nicole Kidman's, or, all these people who are famous. And Michelle Obama, that's another example. But I was just, I wouldn't say, I don't consider myself a nobody, but I think in the publishing world, I didn't think they thought that I was famous enough to guarantee them sales. So I had to start searching other options, and I would Google all the names of publishers, and finally I was able to, get Kohler publishers interested, And they said, okay, Chuck, yeah, well, we come aboard, but first you have to cut your novel significantly. So like I said, I cut it almost in half.
What did many good parts got lost?
I don't think loss is the correct word because I think anything you write stays in your head and it kind of influences what you do in the future. So although I was not able to use those chapters inspired me to write my novel, which I did. And like I told you, the name of it is Eye of the Storm.
Was your work inspired by any other writer?
Oh my goodness. Well, my very favorite writer is Ernest Hemingway. And I remember when I was about 14 years old, I read his book, The Old Man and the Sea. And of course, it had a lot of relevance to me. And I felt connected to it because I'm the son of Cuban parents. And that novel is set in Cuba, an old man fishing, trying to get the big fish. And I thought that the novel, what I found interesting about it was that it's much more than just an old man fishing. It's about overcoming obstacles and being able to keep on going in your life and setting goals for yourself and never giving up. That's what I got from that book. And of course, I read all of Ernest Hemingway's novels, and he's really inspired me. In fact, while I was writing this latest book, I sort of used him as a muse, and I would sort of say to myself, well, what would Ernest Hemingway say about this sentence? And okay, Chuck, cut out this word, cut out that word. So he's been a great inspiration.
Okay. So what is your writing routine? How did you prepare when you start to write a book?
So what I do is, I have my spouse and I have two separate apartments in the same building. He's 4 floors down, I'm 4 floors up. So, of course, I sleep over, and then in the morning we have breakfast. And by 12 o'clock, I'm in my apartment because I need to be completely alone. And I just start, writing. I have a general idea of what I want to say. And of course, I think the challenge for any writer is, how do you keep going? How do you not allow yourself to be blocked, which is, what you hear about a lot of writers who. And so what ends up happening is sometimes you procrastinate, sometimes you come back to it, sometimes you think about it. Maybe that's why it took me 4.5 years to write this latest book. But I feel that I need to give myself 4 to 6 hours just by myself and just see what happens. Go on the typewriter, go on the laptop, and just have it come out. And sometimes when I'd be writing, I'd get stuck. And then I'd just start, okay, well, I'm just going to start writing about a dream that I had. Or I would write things that weren't even related. And in the process of writing, it would bring up other ideas in my head. And so I could keep going. So I think every writer has a different process. Mine is just to keep writing and not worry about the end result. Just certainly in the first draft, just write. Even if you have to correct it later, just to not to censor yourself and just to allow yourself complete creativity.
I agree. It's better to just finish the first draft as soon as you can, and then you can fix it.
Yes. Are you a writer yourself?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So do you have any particular method for the times where you get stuck or something like that?
Well, I put on, first thing I do is I put on music. I put on classical music. I particularly like harp music or flute music, and somehow it just triggers things in my mind. And I think as a writer, and I'm sure that you feel this way too, anything in life can inspire you. Sometimes you're on the subway, you see a couple sitting together, they kiss, and it just sort of like triggers something in your mind, and it brings you, great joy, and you can put that into your writing. I find that we can be inspired by anything. The trick is not to say to yourself, oh, okay, so the book has to be this way. You have to not set limits on yourself. And I think that's what's helped me with this latest book, that I just kept going and writing. I did the first draft. Oh my goodness. And that was like about 2 years ago. And it's amazing how the book grew since then. I will tell you this, a year and a half ago, I had a heart transplant. And I thought that I didn't know if I was going to come out alive from the transplant. So I had written a great deal. So I told my spouse, listen, in case I die, this is what I have, take it to some publisher or do something with it. But what happened is, of course, I survived. And that experience of almost being near death, it completely changed how I thought about life and how I thought about writing. I would say that after the heart transplant, I would have these ideas come to me that I never had before. For example, right before you go to sleep, in that little area before you just drift off, I would get all these ideas. And then in the morning, when I wake up, the same thing. And then I go into the shower, and then I just in my mind, I let it, simmer. And then I'd come upstairs, and then I'd put it on paper. So I would say that the heart transplant really made this book great, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know what everybody else is going to say.
Any experience is valid in this.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And this latest book that I did, the novel, it was really inspired by a friend of mine who had, from the ages of 7 to 11, had been sexually abused by a relative. And, he's my friend today, So that had stuck in my mind. And then in 1988, about 1990, I had been writing plays for the Public Theater here in New York, the New York Shakespeare Festival, which was headed by Joseph Papp. And I had written 2 plays for them. And then I said, okay, well, when I write my third play, I decided to write about the subject, which was about a boy who was living in a family and was abused. In this case, I made it his father. Now sexual abuse can happen.
It can be anyone, I know.
It can be anyone, as you know. And
but the stereotype is always the uncle.
Right? Oh yeah, the uncle, correct, yes. And then, since I lived in Miami, I remembered we had lived through so many hurricanes. So I decided that I would make the hurricane almost like a metaphor for revealing the dark secrets that were existing in this family. And it's almost as if the hurricane blew all the secrets out. And so hence the title, Eye of the Storm.
Nice.
But of course, I made it about a lot of other things too. And, people always say to me, when I've sent drafts of the novel to friends just to see what they think, they say, well, Chuck, is it autobiographical? And I would say, no, it's not. But I would say that my experiences, I put them into the novel in the sense that I lived in Miami. I know what the Cuban American community is like. So I think any writer uses experiences from their lives, even if it's not an autobiography, to put into a novel, because the lives we live influence everything that we do. And I think they also influence authors and what they write.
Okay. So I understand how you name it, The Eye of the Storm, but
yes.
Do you have a story of how you named the first book?
Well, of course, I am the son of Cuban parents. So I was thinking of a title that would reflect that. So I kept thinking. And then an image came to me, which was the sun rising. And the sun rising in Cuba is particularly beautiful. There's a seawall called El Malecón, and a lot of countries, Latin countries especially, have these, seawalls. Puerto Rico has one. And I remember that as a child, I went there when I was 7 years old with my mother, and we went to El Malecón. And one morning we went there to see the sunrise. That always stuck in my head. So I said, okay, Cuban sun rising, but Cuban S-O-N, sun rising. So that's how the
A
title came to
wordplay.
me. Yeah, wordplay. And I don't know, sometimes titles, I don't know if this is your experience, but they come to you in the most, in ways you don't expect sometimes, right?
It
They
never
just sort of,
does.
yeah. And so
Hmm.
that's how I named the first book. And Eye of the Storm, I was thinking that in a hurricane, and if you live through a hurricane, we all know about the eye. Now, what happens during the eye? It's very calm. So everybody thinks that, okay, let's go out and, it's over. But no, the other part of the storm comes, and sometimes with more intensity. So I think it's a metaphor for life in a way, because sometimes we experience great calms, periods of calm, but we know that that's not going to last forever because life is constantly changing, and
Right.
we're always facing new crises. So that's why I wanted to call it Eye of the Storm, because I thought it was a great metaphor, not only in the book, but also for how we live our lives.
So, tell me, what's like the most difficult thing you had to struggle when you start writing first time?
For me, it's trying to find something on another level. For example, things exist in life, but then if you start going underneath, there are other levels. For example, if you look out at I have the Hudson River over here to my left. I look out there, and as I'm looking, it's sort of I see other things. I see like little boat going by, or I see. So I think in writing, what I do is try to find something lyrical, something poetic that elevates what I'm doing, because otherwise it's just like writing a news story. It's just the facts, ma'am. But I don't want to write just the facts. I want to write something a little deeper. So I think,
Based on what you told me about your second book, I can see that you like the metaphorical style.
yes, I do. And I sometimes when I'm writing, I'll just write a very dry sentence, and then I'll go back and I'll go, gosh, how can I make this a little more descriptive and a little bit more, not dramatic, but I think when a reader is reading a book, they want to be entertained as well. And I think that I always think of the reader when I'm writing, and not just think of myself. Like how can I engage the reader the best? And this particular book that I did, I don't know how this came to me, but I remember when I was 14, I read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And in that book, when I opened it, there were these beautiful illustrations. So I said to myself, okay, when I write a novel, I'm going to put illustrations in it. So I found a woman on Instagram, she's Filipina, who does these beautiful drawings. And I said, oh my goodness, so I got in contact with her and I said, her name is Ona Lorraine Canilao. And I said, Ona, would you consider doing illustrations for my book? And she said, yes. So the fact is, and now I have an illustrated adult novel. Now I have people who say to me, who ask me, oh, but doesn't it cheapen the book, or doesn't it? No. And what I find is that it enhances the book, because I think that to draw readers in, why not give them more than just words? I want to make them think a little bit. So I have 19 illustrations in the book, and they run the gamut from there's the hurricane, and also my book has the backdrop of Santeria, which is a religion that was brought over by the slaves to Cuba, and I think it's in Puerto Rico. It's in a lot of Latin countries. And what they do is they use Catholic saints to correspond to their particular deities. So, for example, in Cuba, the Virgin of Charity, the La Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre, I'm looking over here because I have a statue of the Virgin right over there, corresponds to an entity called Yemaya. And so I depicted that in the book, I had Ona do an illustration, not for Yemaya, but for Chang'o, who's the god of thunder. And the character at one point visits a santero, and while he's visiting the santero, the voice of Chang'o comes through the santero. It's like channeled, and he tells the character what it is that he should be doing. So all these things, which are part of my background, the Cuban background, I used in this book, and I think that that's what makes it a little bit different than most novels, because I think in general Americans don't really know about Santeria, but they do know about mysticism. They do know about magic realism. So I decided to incorporate that in the book. In my book, there's a writer, and he's having difficulty writing his book. He's procrastinating. So he has a muse. A muse comes down and inspires him. And the muse is La Guajira Guantanamera. Now, I don't know, most Americans, and I think most people know the song, Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera. So La Guajira Guantanamera, I bring her to life, and she becomes the muse to this 70-year-old writer who's having trouble writing. And all of a sudden, she starts singing, she inspires him, and he's able to write the entire book. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, and a lot more. So between the two books, what do you think is your favorite?
Oh my goodness, that's like asking a mother what her favorite child is. And I think the authors, and I'm sure you do too, you think of your works as children, really, as they're very special. Let me see. Well, I love the first book, which was a more fact-driven. I would say maybe this book, Eye of the Storm, because, it was so difficult to write, and it was so hard, and it was the fact that I overcame my own obstacles in writing it, I think makes it my favorite, because I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And I think this book is my favorite. I think it's always the last book you write is always your favorite book, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Usually it's because the experience got a lot better, because you know the ropes, you know what to do, and it came more natural than the first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say it came more natural, but at the same time, it had its own challenges, which were different than the first book. And in the second book, I had to let my mind kind of go other places. Usually I'm very, what's the word I want to say, buttoned up and very grounded, somewhat closed. So, but when I'm writing, I just let all that go, and it's almost like a different person's writing it. I don't know if you feel like that sometimes. That you allow the inner child in you to sort of take over and not to be afraid of anything, and then you can just write to your heart's content, and that's what I think is very wonderful about writing.
Right. So tell me, do you have like an advice for any new writers starting right now?
I would say the obvious: don't give up, don't surrender. I read somewhere that almost 80% of writers who start a book never finish them.
Yes, that's true.
And I can understand that, because it's very difficult to not give in to the self-doubts. And I think that every writer has doubts about what they're writing. They're thinking, oh, will anyone like this? What are people going to think about what I'm writing? Will they think that I'm And my advice would be not to censor yourself, just to say to yourself, I am going to make this book work, and this book will be published. Make it, manifest it. And I think that a lot of writers give up because they think that they're not going to be able to be successful. And I think that's the key. You can't think, oh my goodness, will I be picked up by a big publisher, and will my book sell, millions of copies? And you can't think that way. You have to write from your heart and not care what it's going to be, because otherwise you're going to censor yourself. You're going to stop the creative flow. So that's what I think. I think a lot of people think, what's the end product going to be? When you write, you can't think that way. You have to write as if you don't know
It
what's
will
going to
fill
happen.
you with anxiety. And so in the end, you're not going to do anything. It's better to just
No,
focus on the present, and that's it.
now, I will tell you this, and I don't know if you've undergone this, but and I think every writer goes through this. There were times when I was writing this latest book that I said to myself, oh, I can't do it. No, I can't. It's not going to happen. I can't finish it. I don't know how I'm going to end it. All these things. And I think to be a writer, you have to be able to push through all that. And it's easier said than done. But I think that when you're able to push through, the joy, the satisfaction you get is so tremendous. And that's the way I've kind of felt about this book. And I sort of feel like I pushed it to be published. I made it go in that direction, because otherwise I would have stopped. Because there were times that I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to solve this problem? When you're writing a novel, especially when you're writing fiction, all these problems come up, and you set them up yourself, and you're saying to yourself, well, if I write this, then how do I explain that? Or sometimes you have to go back and change what you wrote in order to write something really beautiful. So it's all these challenges happen while you're writing.
Yeah, in my case, my publisher told me that he wanted to release everything as a series, so I haven't felt like you that relief, because the moment I finish a book, I'm starting the next one.
Oh, really?
He told me
Oh,
that it sells more when it's released as a series than
well, you're
as an
doing a
individual
series,
book.
right? A
Yes.
series, yeah. Wow.
Hmm.
That is so difficult. Yes. I admire you.
Yeah. My series is supposed to be like 5 books, but it's going to become 8, because my first and second book are like 500 pages, and they told me that you need to cut it down, but I don't want to. So it's better to just make 2 books
Exactly.
out of
Yeah.
it.
When I had spoken to a publisher, sometimes out of the blue. I guess after I wrote my first book, I would have these, publishers, sometimes independent publishers, call me. Oh, are you working on your next book? And one of them said to me, "Oh, can we make your book a series?" And I go, "I don't think so, because the main character dies at the end. So I don't know if you can continue it. Maybe I'll have him in heaven or something, But you get a series like you're doing. That's I applaud you, because I wish I could do that. I don't think
Well,
I have that.
technically you could with a spin-off and maybe prequels, or
Or take one of the characters and go with them, and one of the other characters, and
yeah, it doesn't really need. If a main character dies, you could always just use other people of the cast, or a
wow.
prequel.
Yes, of course. You said something that I thought was interesting, that when you finish one book, you immediately start running the other. I can't do that. I feel like when I finish a book, I have to go, just like sit back and, at least give myself like about maybe 2 months or something. And then I go into it. Because I think the process of getting a book published, as you know, is so exhausting. I find it mentally so stressful and exhausting that I feel like I want to take a rest.
Hey, at least you're published. I mean, at least you have a publisher with you. When it's self-publishing, I think it's worse.
In what sense? You mean that you?
In self-publishing, everything is up to you, and you have to break your brain with the marketing and strategies and everything. and contacting printers and make deals. It's I think self-publishing gave you the freedom to choose what you want. If you want to publish I don't know 1,000 pages, you can do that. No one's going to tell you anything. You can do the cover you want, but both
I understand
methods
what you're.
had their pros and the cons.
Well,
You
one of my motivations, I'll be honest with you. I said, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could get a review from the New York Times, right? And so I started researching. And I read somewhere, now I don't know if this is exactly true, that the New York Times doesn't want to review a book unless it sells a certain amount of copies in the first week. I was wondering how many copies. Well, more than 1,000. I know that. And how many authors can sell 1,000 book? 1,000 books.
celebrities.
Celebrities, right? But John Q. Public, or me or you, we're not as well known as those celebrities. So you're saying to yourself, what is the magic formula to get people to read a book? And I think there is no formula, right? Like you never know what is going to be a success. I'm thinking of that book, 50 Shades of Grey, which became a phenomenal bestseller.
Yeah, that fanfic that became a book. Yeah, I know the story.
Right. So I read somewhere that the first, when the author was trying to sell it, she couldn't really get anyone interested. And I don't know, then she added more sex to it, I guess. And of course, we know that sex always seems to sell. But I think that's the greatest challenge for a lot of writers, because all writers, when they write a book, want it to sell. They don't want it just to sit there. But it's hard to know what the magic formula is. We write because we have to write. We don't write because we need to sell. I mean, that's the way you should look at it, I guess.
Actually, talking about the topic, my opinion is that at that time, at that moment, there was a space for something like 50 Shades. At that time, there was nothing on the market like that at that moment.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's luck. I'm not going to undermine the ability of the writer. I'm not going to say it was luck, but I think that many things moved on her favor to reach that goal. Because the reality is that there wasn't anything like her work at that moment. That's why people got so interested with I mean, bondage. His stories are not really BDSM, etc. It's not really a topic that it's frequently talked.
Yes, but you don't know you don't know if a book on that is going to take off. So, but look at that one. That was amazing. This current book that I'm doing deals with some particularly difficult topics. And when I was writing it, I said to myself, oh my God, well, is this going to sell? And the topics include, like I had told you, sexual abuse, domestic violence, because the mother in the story is beaten by her husband, mental illness, incarceration, elder abuse. So at first, when you mention these topics, people are going, "Oh my God, I don't want to read about that." But the challenge for the writer and the author is, how do you bring people into the story? And
honestly, talking a bit about that, I think you have to do it in a tasteful way, because I have seen many writers doing like just for being edgy, and it doesn't work like that. You have to make them tasteful too.
Yeah, tasteful, and also I want to say concentrate on the humanity of what's going on. Concentrate on characters. Make these characters come to life. Make the reader care about them. See that? So that's a challenge. So in my case, I have a 70-year-old man who wants to write about being abused when he was younger, but he's wondering if it's going to, if his family's going to be upset about it. Finally, he's able to break through and do it. So, I mean, there are so many challenges for a writer, and I think the answer is to try to figure out how to draw the reader in. I mean, that's true of any book, I guess.
So tell me, changing a bit the topic, do you have like a talk experience, something that you never forgot when interacting with a reader of your work?
Oh, yes. I would say that in my, the first book I wrote, Cuban Sun Rising, I thought, well, maybe it's very specific and it won't, Americans won't be interested, or a wider audience won't be interested. But I would receive notices. Sometimes they would send me notices in my messenger on Facebook. Oh, I read your book and it touched me so much, and I never knew anything about Cuba, and thank you for opening up this door. And I think when readers read a book, at least this is my experience, you want to be taken to a different world. You want to be taken to a place where you haven't been. And I think that, when a reader says to you, oh, you really taught me about something, or you showed me something I didn't know before, I think that's so rewarding. You're asking me about a specific case. I can't really think of one in particular right now, but I've had readers get in touch with me and tell me that the book moved them, and that's always very gratifying for an author.
Yeah. So tell me, what's like your greatest goal or dream right now as a writer, of course?
Oh, as a writer, yeah. Well, I want to keep writing, and I want to keep having my books published. I think my dream now is the next book I want to do. I want to write about my heart transplant, and what I really would like to do is get in touch with the family of the donor, of the young man who gave his heart in order for me to live. And I think that would be so gratifying for me, just to be able to have, for example, the mother of this young man who gave me his heart, listen to the heartbeat, like put on the stethoscope and hear the beat of his son's heart. And that would make me, I think that's the one thing that I look forward to, that I think about a lot. And I think in general, it's just to keep on writing, and that God give you the health and the ability to keep going and not to surrender. I think the greatest regret is to be 80 years old and look back on your life and, oh my God, I should have written this book, and maybe if I should have written that book, and then not have done it. So my whole thing now is just keep writing, keep going. And I think that's going to be the most rewarding thing for me, is that's what I'm meant to do. So that's what I want to do.
I understand. So do you have like a support network with other writers?
Yes, I do. I have one friend. Now, I admire him so much. When I started writing my first book, he was writing his book. Since then, he's written 4 books. So I sometimes say to him, how do you do it? And he said to me, well, Chuck, I don't really have anything else to do. So I think that's funny. Yeah, I know. I definitely always try to speak to other writers, especially Cuban writers, and see what, fellow Cuban writers, to see what they think is important, what they're writing about. No, definitely. I think it's very important to have a network of friends who are writers, because otherwise you close yourself off and you don't know what other writers are dealing with. I mean, different writers have different challenges. For example, in your case, writing a series, that's a whole different challenge in itself. So yeah, I think it's very important to keep in touch with writers.
So what do you think is like your greatest accomplishment in your writing career right now?
Wow. And my greatest accomplishment in my writing career. Well, since I've only had one book published, I would say that the autobiography, Cuban Sun Rising, was a tremendous achievement. I mean, I felt wonderful about it because it won three top prizes in three independent book award competitions. Best autobiography, LGBTQ, and when other people recognize your work, it just makes you feel like you can keep going, right? And so I would say the greatest achievement was, writing my first book. And I these people who write 10 books, I'm so in awe of them, and I hope I have enough time in my life to be able to do that. So I would say my greatest achievement was getting my first book published.
Starting the path.
And starting the path, you're right. Absolutely.
Okay. So tell me, how do you stay creatively inspired?
Well, I think in my case, reading, I read as much as I can, or I had never really listened to audible books before I made my last book an audible book. Now I've been getting more into it, and I find it fascinating because when you listen to a book, it's so much different than when you're reading it, because the narrator brings his own interpretation of what the story is, and sometimes they take you on these journeys, and so sometimes when you're listening to a book, it can be very gratifying. And so I always either keep reading or listening to books, because I think that is the greatest spark for a writer to see great writing by other authors to inspire you to keep writing yourself.
Okay. So, are you planning your next book, like at least the main idea?
I already know the title. I already know what I want to do with it. So the next book, I want to call it Heart to Heart, which is, of course, the donor's heart to my heart, heart to heart. And I want it to be about my transplant journey. But I want to go back to when I first started having heart issues. But more than that, I really wanted to go into the history of, for example, the first heart transplant, which was done many years ago by Dr. Christian Bernard. And at the beginning, I was fascinated to learn that he experimented with monkeys, with animals, and then finally getting to the point, well, let's try human to human hearts. And then the first heart transplant wasn't that successful because the recipient died within 24 hours. So then as time went on, medical science became more advanced. And now, of course, you have people living a long time after they have a heart transplant. So I'm very...
Yeah, it happened to me too. I got a cornea transplant, and basically it was a failure because the person which was my donor died like 3 or 4 days before, and and the cornea was already in a bad state. So so they had to take it again. It was very painful because the cornea wasn't fully in there, so they have to take it the next day. I had to go to the hospital in emergency to take it down and go back to zero. Then I got a new donor which had it was fresh in a way, and I could get my cornea.
Well, my heart donor was, from what I understand, I have no idea who he is, but I generally was told that he was a young man, 28 years old, who died in a car accident. So, if I have the heart of a 28-year-old, I'm saying, okay, well, maybe I can live a long time. But, you never know what's going to happen. But I'm also interested in the heart as a metaphor in history. Of course, the heart symbolizing love, the heart symbolizing so many things. And so I think the heart in our culture represents so many things, and I want to explore that avenue too. I want to be able to not just make it about my heart transplant per se, but just sort of expand a little bit more on the meaning of the heart, in literature and throughout history.
Right. Can you tell me in which platforms we can get your books?
Cuban Sun Rising. You can get it, it's on Amazon. I have it it's a Kindle book. It's an Audible book. You can get it through Barnes and Noble. It's really on many platforms. And all someone has to do is go to Amazon and put in Cuban Sun Rising book, and they can find out how to write it. Now, currently, I'm working with Kindle Direct Publishing, and they of course know how to market a book. And again, as long as you get it on Amazon, so people can buy it. But I'm also interested in learning about how to get books in libraries. What authors don't realize is that they can send their books to libraries. Of course, it costs money to get. You have to get your books.
I thought that's something that publishers do.
Sometimes they do. My last publisher didn't do it, so it sort of was my responsibility. And I think it's important to get books in libraries because so many people wait to read a book or a bestseller. They wait until it's in the library. Sometimes they have to wait 3 months or something, but they eventually get it.
And some readers don't like digital books. My mother is one of them. She doesn't like them. If her eyes get too tired.
And when you say digital book, you mean like a Kindle book or a book?
Yeah, and reading in your PC or your notebook or your cell phone. She prefers to have the book, the physical book, because she doesn't feel tired.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, I agree. And but I know people who actually read books on their iPhone.
Oh God!
Oh my goodness!
I'm young and I can't even do that. My eyes hurt. God, Lord.
Yeah, I'd have to get out the glasses and start looking, and yeah.
Yeah.
But I think nowadays the good thing is that you can get your book. Books can be put out in so many different ways. I'd like to look into translating my book. The last book I didn't even think about it, but this book, Eye of the Storm, is going to be in Spanish. I'm going to have it in English and Spanish. And so in my mind, I think, well, then you can reach more readers if you have a different language, right? I don't think a lot of writers think that way necessarily because
I'm planning to do the same, mostly because my family can read in English. So yeah.
Yes. I've had a lot of, I have relatives who can't read in English who have said, ¿Cuándo vas a poner el libro en español? I said, well, voy a tratar, I'm going to try to do it. And I think, many, if it's not in one's language, you don't want to read it, right?
Yeah. So tell me, are you planning to go to an event to promote yourself maybe soon?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I'm kind of even though I was on television news and I was a reporter, I'm somewhat of a reserved person personally. So the idea of going out there, my book, scares me a little bit. I didn't do it too much during my first book. But for example, I'm doing this interview with you, and that's going to make perhaps the books more visible, or people will be interested in them. So I haven't made any plans per se. I'm so involved now in getting the proofreading of the book done and all that. But no, I think you're very right. Do you do that yourself? I mean, it's hard, isn't it, just to go out there and push your book?
As I don't have the book on hand, I can really start doing that. But I do plan to do that someday. Especially because some of my guests had told me a lot of stories about it. I met a guy that basically goes outside of Walmart and put a stand there and just promote themselves.
Well, it's funny you say that because my friend that I was telling you about, who's written 4 books in the last a few years, he goes to all these book fairs, like all these tiny little book fairs everywhere.
Actually, in New York, there's a lot of them.
Yes, there are, and I had to look into that. I had not done that. I did not do that with my first book. I think, the idea that I'm at a little table and I have my book, and then I'm wondering if people walking by are going to ignore my, I start thinking of all these scenarios. But I think what you have to do is just do it. Just go out there and have you done that with your book? Oh, you haven't written it yet?
No.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, isn't it? Like to go out there and set up a little table and,
and being judged. Yeah.
Yeah, judged. That's the thing. But, your book's going to be judged one way or another, right? People are going to like it or they're not going to like it, or, you might get terrible reviews, but, that's no reason not to write the book.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, you're already putting yourself in the public in one way or another, so you have to cross the bridge someday. Right. Lucky for you, you already have the experience. Do your previous job.
Yes. Yeah.
So you're basically already a public figure.
Well, in television, I would be like a nervous mess before, and then the light would come on, or the cameraman would say, "Go, Chuck," and then I'd be like perfectly perfect, right? So I'm thinking maybe the same way in promoting your book. I'm not afraid of doing it, but once you start doing it and you get involved, it'll probably be easier, right? So I am going to try that this time.
Okay, that's good. So can you tell us your social media where people could contact you, etc.?
Well, I'm on social media. I'm on, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Not so much. I'm not really much of a TikTok person. But as you know, the challenge in social media is to get followers. And I'm always I admire these people. I see them on Instagram. They have 50,000 followers they have. But what they do is they have videos that are produced. They have the light, and they have, someone telling. And I said, oh my goodness, it's such a job to do that. You almost have to spend the entire day. I mean, you have to do the video, you have to edit the video, and I haven't done that yet. So that's another challenge. But yes, of course, my first book, the publisher said, okay, we're not going to do any promotion. Whatever you have on social media, that's your promotion. So, I did the best I could on Facebook and everything, Instagram. But I'm on all those platforms. I just have to figure out a way to get more followers. That's all.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, I think that's all for now. Thank you so much for joining us today and for this interview.
I want to thank Markee Books for this opportunity to talk about my book. Thank you so much. Actually, they did the cover of Eye of the Storm. They've been very, very helpful all the way through. They've also done a promotional video for me, and I love the folks at Markee. Yes, I really do.
Thank you so much. Well, everyone, this was another episode of Writing Inspiration with Markee Books. I'm your host, Dan Recoveri, and bye, Chuck.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Have a nice day.